If you've heard of Just Cause 4, you must have heard some really nasty things about it. But to me, it's an anomaly, especially when I look at it from a 2022 perspective. Granted that the game had many issues during the time of its release, but I think it's only fair we judge a game for what it is today and not what it was back then. Because if you're the minority who agree with me, you know what I'm talking about. And despite the game being excellent in its own right, it wasn't able to garner the attention of people across the world, and the technical difficulties during the release surely didn't help. There's also a possibility that I had meager expectations from Just Cause 4 after playing 3, but I can tell you wholeheartedly that it surpassed all that I assumed with flying colors. I've been around the forums, so I know the outright hate the game and the developers got during the time of its release. Does it deserve it? Maybe in 2018, but today it's a totally different beast. A big chunk of the major problems are fixed, the story is really good with some mind-blowing moments, and they have finally made a playground worthy of the one-man army that is RICO. And by the end of the video, if you find my arguments reasonable, go grab that Reloaded edition, which is on sale pretty cheap on the Square Enix website. And of course, there are spoilers in the video, so if you have it on your to-play list, I'd highly encourage you to go play it and then come back and watch the video, because then everything I'm saying will make a lot more sense. Also, I'd like to acknowledge that subjectivity exists, so if you don't like it, you're entitled to your opinion, of course, but please be respectful in the comments. And I'll make sure I address all the criticism that it deserves, because it's by no stretch a perfect game. Let's start with the visuals, because this is where the majority of the problems lie in my estimation. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, here's a brief overlay. The map goes on forever, and unlike Just Cause 3's world, this one is more visually pleasing and has far more interesting side quests to pursue. And it's one single big island mostly. There are a few extra bits of land, but those only count if you have purchased the DLCs, which I highly recommend you do. More on the DLCs later. The world is divided into 3 different climate regions. So there's a dense forest, there's snowy mountains, and there's also a full-blown desert region. All the 3 climate zones feel very well made, and the credit goes to the Apex game engine that allows for extreme weather effects to be simulated seamlessly. Well, not so seamlessly, but yeah. Also, each zone has its own set of natural calamities that occur as the game revolves around Oscar Espinosa, the head of the Black Hand, also dubbed the world's most powerful private military force that RICO has crossed paths with previously, and his project IAPA, which if developed will give Oscar the full control over weather itself. I will expand on the characters and their motives in detail later on. I feel people don't give enough credit to the creators for making a map that's arguably more ambitious than anything we've seen before. The jungle is thick and dense as it's supposed to be, with little towns and few cities in between them. The mountainous layout really adds a good bit of realism, because usually forests in game feel more open and spaced out than they would be in real life, like in Assassin's Creed 3. But here it's dense as it can be. Trees are tall and bushy enough to block out the sun. There are different types of vegetation, and the way it appears overall is brilliant. There's also tornadoes that not only look pretty scary, but suck you in and blow you to bits if not careful. Another occurrence that takes place is thunder striking RICO and people around him in certain parts of the map, and it wouldn't be much of an island without some hidden caves, now would it? They aren't as abundant as they are in Odyssey, but the few that do exist are really well hidden. And it forces the players to work for the reward, since it's highly unlikely that you would come across some of these locations by accident. They've also added an infinite number of breakable rocks that lay in the middle of all natural habitat, and although that makes the driving a bit of a hassle, it takes the authenticity up a great deal, because in actuality, smooth surfaces are usually non-existent in places like mountains. The snow region is probably my least favorite of the 3, partly because it reminds me of the Montana mountain region in Just Cause 3, or it could also be because of how inaccessible it is during the majority of the game. You simply can't go there without being shot down in a matter of seconds, and I feel a couple of minutes is barely enough to explore such a massive chunk of land. As the game progresses, you will get access to parts of it, but it's more of a fortress than a mountain. Yes, exactly like the Falco CENTCOM, but the appearance of the snow itself is top tier. The only other game that made snow seem convincing to me was Assassin's Creed 3, and the frontier during winter seemed as real as possible for the technology back then. But the graphical advancements have allowed Just Cause 4 to surpass that and make the snow more realistic than ever. And a big reason they were able to bring about that feeling is due to the inclusion of the blizzards that occur. It's not just a bit of snow and wind. If not careful, the blizzard will strike you down. Rico also changes the way he moves when there's a blizzard or a sandstorm, which I thought was a cool bit of addition because it elevates the whole experience since it would be practically impossible to move in a nimble manner when there's a storm around. The weather change isn't sudden from region to region. For example, the parts where the snowy mountains lead to the desert have a gradual change that doesn't feel fake or out of place. It is exactly as it is in real life in places like Afghanistan. One thing that stood out for me were the statues that could be moved or rotated rather all throughout the map, which lead to a nice little surprise at the end. This gave the entirety of Solis some much needed mystique as it tells us that the place is ancient and has secrets that nobody knows. It also speaks of the heritage of Solis itself. The desert is simply marvelous. It gives out a convincing representation of a barren 21st century wasteland. There are also places that give you serious Area 51 feels with unbelievably massive underground prisons hidden out in the middle of nowhere. And of course, the desert wouldn't be complete without a terrifying sandstorm, right? It really makes the visibility minimal and forces you to improvise on the fly to avoid being hit or killed. But there was a problem. I played Assassin's Creed Origins before I played Just Cause 4, so when I see a desert, I expect something at least close to what we saw in Origins, and this was nothing like that. The desert of Ptolemaic Egypt is just leaps and bounds ahead of anything I've seen in ages. It's not even the sheer attention to detail or the vastly superior texture quality of the sands, but the entire layout of the barren wasteland is just jaw-dropping. So my expectations with the desert region were astronomical, but sorry to say, it's nothing compared to Origins. And this also seems to be the most underutilized area of the map, but more on that later. And it's not just people that exist in Solis, but a great many animals, as the place has a lot of them and of different kinds. They don't play any part in the game, but they definitely make the world feel a lot more real. Because if there are jungles, one would expect at least some wild beasts. Cities are laid out rather well and is miles ahead of the ones we saw in Just Cause 3. I've previously mentioned how the cities and towns of Medici were all lookalikes of each other. Thankfully, that did not happen here. Some parts of the city do seem a little identical, but most places will seem rather new, and that makes the exploration way better. Even the structural makeup is not only different but more realistic. Where Just Cause 3 had only one city, the Città di Ravello, there are multiple here, like Villanueva, Gioia del Sol, Vista Futura, and the cities have landmarks like football stadiums, skyscrapers, merry-go-rounds, and whatnot. There's also a full-blown international airport, which is my favorite place to test the top speed of supercars. I mean, where else would you find a mile-long road with no traffic, huh? Also, there's more of a significance that places hold. Unlike what we saw in Just Cause 3, there you just liberate most provinces without any coherent storyline taking you there, but here places mean something, which is really important because if 90% of the map holds absolutely no significance, then they might as well not be there, you know? Dead Space has always been a telling sign of a lack of creativity to me, which brings me to the utilization of the massive 1000 plus square kilometer map, which seems gigantic in and of itself, but when you remember Just Cause 3's 2000 plus square kilometer map, this one seems much better off as there isn't a ton of endless oceans that are dead in the water. Sorry about that. And since it's spaced out much better, traveling becomes an enjoyable experience. But no matter how badly you want to see the sights, I'd recommend you go forward enough to activate the fast travel option ASAP, or you'd just be gliding or driving to places all the time. And even though the map is literally half the size, don't expect the traveling time to be any shorter. Even if you have the fastest plane, it would take you a good 2 to 5 minutes if you want to travel to a faraway location. I know that doesn't sound like a big deal when said that way, but when you add it all up, it comes to tens of hours of traveling just within the game, which really doesn't make sense to me. Now let's head over to the criticisms, which I gotta say are really justified. A big glaring issue with the game was the water. It just looked so unnatural. Where Just Cause 3 had an endless blue ocean that was pleasing and realistic at the same time, here the water bodies look extremely unnatural. Water, according to me, should have a liquidy look, but I kid you not, it looks like a mile-long black-brown satin cloth that was spread over all of the water bodies. I observed that even the waves seem to be missing, which makes zero sense. There are a considerable number of rivers and ponds, but they look terrible too. Thankfully, Solis doesn't have as much water as Medici, but it's still enough to throw the aesthetics way off. Most rivers look like they are muddy and dirty. Why did they make it appear brown? I have no idea. And the oceans in the river should look different, right? Well, it doesn't. Not one bit. And add to that the fact that the entirety of the underwater space is completely dead and incoherent, and this becomes a pretty big issue. At least in Just Cause 3 we had 3 or 4 occasions where Rico would dive underwater to get to a location, but here even that scenario is absent. So what was the point really, huh? And the second problem is with the vegetation, which is partially solved. What happened was that the trees and grass all looked outright flat when the game was released, and people who paid good money brought the hammer down hard. So the developers created a patch which pretty much fixed the issue. Although it does feel out of place infrequently, the majority of the times it looks really good. They do deserve to be called out for these blunders, as there is no excuse for releasing an unfinished game to the market, especially when they're charging upwards of $60 for it. If you want people to pay that price, the least you have to do is make sure your product is polished. And since we are talking about the visuals, let's touch on the character designs briefly. The designs themselves are pretty damn good. All the main and the supporting characters have distinct appearances and stand out in their own way. I didn't like the fact that Rico looked kind of small in Just Cause 3, but here his design looks much improved. That could also be because the camera was panned a bit further in 3, but here it's a tad bit closer. But the change is good and much needed. The side characters also look terrific, especially Mira Morales, Gabriela Morales, Tom Sheldon, and Lanza Morales. These 4 are the most coherent in the storyline, and their designs reflect that a lot of effort went into these character designs. But what seems terrible is all their hair, be it the head bit or the facial hair. It all looks like fiber, or rather wires. Reminded me of Assassin's Creed Unity in that regard. And except for the water, I really like the color palette of the rest of the world. One thing I hated in Just Cause 3 was the glaring red and blue, which signified the Di Ravello army and the Rebel army respectively. It felt off. See, I do understand that it should stand out so that you can recognize whom to shoot, but it looked out of place more than anything else. Here the colors are seamless, and they are a big factor in the environment blending effortlessly. War zones in Solis are stunning. 2 sides trying to kill each other to take over territories has never looked this aesthetic. The chaos objects that Rico has to destroy to advance the storyline do stand out, but are still ambiguous enough to make it a decent bit of a challenge. And nobody seems to be talking about the sky because it's pretty darn beautiful. Not just in the morning, but at night as well. I think it's only fair that if people are criticizing a product and calling it out for the things it did wrong, they also should give it credit for what it got right, no matter how big or small. Speaking of night times, I really prefer this version of Just Cause 3 Sundowns, because in Medici, no matter the time, the visibility remained pretty much the same. But here it's tougher to see and determine things at night, as it should be if you ask me. It doesn't look any less beautiful either. Since there's a ton of natural habitat, the light pollution is minimal, so the well-lit roads and towns look stunning at night. I do understand that all this is not that big of a deal, but the way they all come together organically and with such ease is really worthy of applause. They've also taken a genius bit of detail from Assassin's Creed. Remember how in Origins and Odyssey faraway locations, although visible, were kind of blurry? It happens here as well. And what it does is it allows the GPU unit some breathing space, as it doesn't have to work overtime to render that much detail. The way the map appears in the map section really seems much better. Not only does it indicate as to which zone has what climate, it also gives a comprehensive and easy to distinguish representation of what objectives lie where, how many you have completed, and how many more remain. I won't lie, Just Cause 3's on-screen map confused me. It really did. More often than not, I'd be wondering as to where a certain time trial is, as the icons were just not so clear. But here, it's way better. In hindsight, games like Origins and Odyssey might feel like they were much bigger, but that's only because there are helicopters and planes flying around at 250 miles per hour in Just Cause, whereas in Assassin's Creed games, a horse or a ship was probably the fastest way around. So the vastly decreased travel speed is the main reason why Egypt and Greece feel way bigger. But I can assure you, Solis is colossal. Now let's move over to the gameplay part, because this truly is the bread of the entire series. And before you ask me where the butter is, I'll get to that later on. Just Cause isn't as famous for massive worlds or the best storylines as it is for fast-paced, nail-biting action that never seems to be missing. The gameplay elements have received a massive upgrade from the previous installment. The world is divided into multiple territories, but liberation isn't enough to take over a province anymore. You have to first cause a ton of chaos by destroying Black Hand bases, which increases your chaos meter. And as and when you get up to the next level, you receive squads. Once that happens, you have to finish a certain distinct task associated to the region, which then makes the place vulnerable to invasion. And then you use the squads you receive to take over the territory. Although it sounds complicated, it's a lot of fun. By eliminating the simple smash and grab approach, they've given the whole invasion part a much needed complexity. The grappling hook still remains as Rico's primary equipment along with the parachute and the wingsuit. The grapnel now has added applications. It's not just a traversal tool anymore. It was already pretty handy in combat in Just Cause 3, but here it has an airlifter, which is a balloon of sorts, and a booster, and all three attachments can be chosen quickly to deploy them. In addition to this, the marquee equipment is completely customizable, as it can be modified to snap off at a certain length, retract faster or slower, increasing or decreasing booster strength. You can select the ceiling height for the airlifter, the weight it could carry, and the durability. The boosters can be modified to lift or push in any direction or duration. List just goes on, and you can choose which modification combinations you prefer and add that through your GH loadout. So it essentially becomes the ultimate tool for destruction. It's mentioned in one of the DLCs how the grapnel costs $3 million, and this game finally justified the price tag, because with just the grapnel you can take control of any situation, destroy helicopters, kill battalions, throw airplanes off their trajectory, tow cars, destroy chaos objects, misdirection, object guidance. It's literally a one-stop shop for all your destruction needs. The combat is also much improved, I feel. In Just Cause 3, the guns were all pretty much the same and ammunition was abundant. I don't remember running out of bullets one time while fighting the Ravello's army, but here you gotta be able to pick up what you can, where you can, and use the weapon type to your advantage, or else you are done. Plus, there are so many different types of weapon with incompatible ammunition that you just can't depend on one gun to get the job done. It also makes combat a much more immersive experience as it forces you to improvise. There are only 2 weapon slots, and both are double-handed, so no more pistols for Rico. As the game progresses, you can get your hand on better and more sophisticated firearms. And this goddamn son of a bitch can shoot at any time from any position. Like, it doesn't matter if you're in free fall, hanging upside down from a helicopter, or ziplining to any point, Rico can shoot. This was already added in Just Cause 3, so it's just a positive that remains intact. There's all kinds of equipment, from SMGs to fully automatic rifles, sniper rifles, rocket launchers, machine guns, turrets and whatnot. Plus, almost all weapons have a secondary attachment like a grenade launcher or a mini bazooka. Little layers like this make all the difference in the world. It doesn't take much to go from average to great, just the right things. And I feel they did enough to push it to extremely good, if not great. The traversal is as fun as ever, with one glaring issue. If you don't buy the reloaded version of the game, you don't get access to the Black Hand Sky Striker, which is Just Cause 4's version of the Bavarium jetpack. People who are unaccustomed to the jet probably won't be bothered, but if you are used to the boost as I was, you will hate it. I genuinely felt crippled without it. The Sky Striker also has a missile system which fires 4 projectiles at once. Their ammo is infinite, but it takes some time to reload. The targeting system is not as convenient as it previously was. The missiles don't exactly strike where you aim. Since there are 4, they strike at 4 points around the target. So you have to size up the measurements of the target and the trajectory of the missiles to actually hit the target. No more target locks. They have removed the machine gun though, so the missiles are all you have while gliding. What was also missing was the side dodge thrust, which made evading missiles hellish. The gliding itself isn't as convenient and easy as it was in Just Cause 3. The maneuverability is probably 50 to 70% of what it used to be. You can't just turn, pivot or land at a moment's notice, and the added difficulty only makes the gameplay more immersive. I don't want it to be Sekiro levels of tough, but if it's too easy, it gets boring real fast. They've also eliminated the option to launch directly from the ground and underwater into a jetpack powered wingsuit flight. It has a few select patterns and color schemes, and you can also add boost bars to the jetpack and more missile strikes by completing the wingsuit stunts, which are way easier and shorter than the wingsuit courses in Just Cause 3. Those were a pain in the ass. Only thing is, when you're equipped with the Sky Striker, your wingsuit feats won't be counted. I really didn't give a damn, as enjoying the experience is more of a priority than cracking a few inconsequential feats in my eyes. The parachute too has a few different designs that are unlocked when you finish some corresponding missions, but my favorite, which is a new addition to the traversal, would be the hoverboard. They have a goddamn hoverboard, like what more do you fucking need? It has some cool skins and it's an absolute treat to ride this. The mechanics are simple, but when you combine it with some some of the objects in the environment, like a snowy downhill path or electricity cables that go around submarines, it becomes a real ally. There are also gliding courses spread across Solis that are way more fun than what I anticipated. It gets especially helpful when you get stuck in water since you can't launch yourself out of it anymore. The next best thing is to start hoverboarding and then transition into a wingsuit flight. The other options available are to either wait for a boat to come near enough to grapnel onto it or swimming a few miles to get to the shore, which sucks. But the hoverboard too is only available in the reloaded pack and above, so that's kind of a bummer. Driving a car is what it was in Just Cause 3, not much has improved or changed except some added control to a select few cars and a ton of new types of vehicles. Bikes are still annoying with the total lack of control and the weird cinematic camera tilt that happens every time you turn unfortunately still exists. Ships, boats and helicopters are literally the same, a few new additions but nothing remarkable. Rico is still crazy enough to go in and out of planes at high altitudes. The vehicle portion of Just Cause has never really stood out to me personally. Driving is just a means to get from point A to point B, as Rico's shooting skills, literal flight capabilities, and the ability to defeat armies is always gonna be the most remarkable features of the game. My much favored mechs are unfortunately missing here, but I guess the kind of terrain this island has, mechs wouldn't be a good fit here. Apparently some people did experience a few glitches and some lagging back in the day, but since I didn't encounter one single such instance in 50 plus hours of gameplay, I think it's safe to say that the problems have indeed been resolved. Let's talk about the gunfights and specifically the AI of the Black Hand now. I can't believe nobody has given it any credit because this has to be some of the most versatile and adaptive bit of AI I have ever seen, with the exception of Odyssey maybe. Games usually have predetermined patterns of movement that enemies employ when moving around or defending themselves, but here some of the elite Black Hand militia move like shadows. The movements are so erratic and the have armor and a bloody thick helmet, so one well-placed shot to the head doesn't do jack shit anymore. There's also soldiers that can be classified as brutes, I guess. They don't move much but fire a massive and terribly damaging minigun and are bloody hard to kill. Like, you have to shoot them 10 times to actually finish them off, and I'm talking precise headshots. If you're dishing out body shots, sometimes you need upwards of 30 to 50 bullets to finish them off. There's also a number of highly trained and skilled agency operatives aboard the aforementioned submarines that are savage and are also equipped with the grapnel just like Rico, so they zip around all over the place and it's pretty hard to determine where they're shooting from, as they could be on top of a drone, hanging upside down a crane, or hooked to a wall somewhere. It gives you some context as to how difficult it is to catch Rico, who's literally zipping around like you're Spider-Man or something. By the time you move the crosshair towards the agency operatives, they grapnel elsewhere, which makes for a damn tough challenge. There are regular foot soldiers that can be killed pretty easily, but you only find them in basic encampments. When you try to take an advanced location like a dam or a fortress, you will have to fight with everything you got to even survive. And it's not just the infantry that has had its skill set upgraded. Even the pilots, ground and marine unit operators have a high IQ. For example, if you're in a helicopter and trying to shoot down another, they'll circle you around so damn fast, you probably won't be able to hit them until they stop. It's not extremely difficult, but the effort required is just enough to raise the stakes to a perfect sweet spot. And now to another aspect that was needlessly criticized, the story. If people appreciated a game for its strong suits, instead of bickering about things that the game isn't even known for, I think life would be much better off. As long as the plot isn't too damn cliched, I think there are other factors that determine how good a game can be. I know I've always advocated for a good story, but you gotta understand that Just Cause 4 does have a decent plot. It's not all that cliched, there are a few unexpected surprises, and the antagonist feels more real. Although his appearances are few and far between, the supporting cast is just charming enough to make for an undeniably enjoyable experience. Now, just because I say that the story is good doesn't mean it doesn't have a plethora of plot holes and inconsistencies, so I will be pointing them out as and when we get to any. But here's how the story goes. Major spoilers ahead, so if you don't want them, I'd advise you to skip ahead to the next chapter. Rico Rodriguez is enlisted by Mira Morales to help her take on the Black Hand, and Rico is told that Oscar Espinosa, the head honcho, is developing a weapons technology called Project IAPA that coincidentally was what Rico's father was working on before he quit and moved back to Medici, which would have given Mr. Espinosa the ability to conjure natural calamities at his command. And when Rico gets there, he forms an army, which is called the Army of Chaos. Not very subtle now, is it? But with the help of Mira and Luis, who is also called Sargento, Rico forms a massive rebel army and takes on the greatest private military force in the world, the Black Hand. And as previously mentioned, there are 4 zones, each with its own distinct calamity, and you have to take over all the research facilities in order to shut them down. At least temporarily, as Rico can start a blizzard or a tornado whenever he chooses from said facilities. But it doesn't really matter, as once the story is over, he won't find much to stay back for. So sandstorm or no sandstorm, it's all the same. And Rico in the process helps Mira break her uncle Lanza Morales out of a highly classified and secure Supermax facility. I didn't really enjoy the fact that Rico has to single-handedly take down most of the bases despite having a literal army at his disposal. I mean, he does all the heavy lifting without any substantial backup. I get the whole one-man army thing, but they should have at least given us the option to call for support if we chose. I mean, what's the point of having an army if it isn't around when the heat is on, huh? And yeah, the antagonist's right hand, Gabriela Morales, is the daughter of Lanza. Exactly why she joined hands with Espinosa and arrested her own father is never explained, but I assumed it was for money. Well, when they don't explain stuff, you gotta make up your own story, I guess. Tom Sheldon, Rico's former agency handler and ally, also shows up in Solis, claiming to be there to help Rico take down Iapa, as he was unofficially fired from the agency once he got his hands on intel suggesting that the agency was in bed with the Black Hand. This I felt was another plot hole, as Tom has always been a conniving and selfish agency man. He quit all that because they were doing something quite disastrous. I mean, this isn't the first time that the agency has taken a dive into the illegal and unethical weapons development pond. That doesn't sound like the Tom Sheldon I saw in Just Cause 3 at all. But once he is there, he joins hands with the Army of Chaos and Rico and assists them in all possible ways. They also recruit Cesar Petrone, who's a conspiracy theorist. See what I mean? A recurring theme of important characters having little or no background story. Like whatever happened to Mira's parents, and who is Sargento, and what's up with his past, and Cesar is just a conspiracy and science guy. No backstory, no explanation, nothing. I feel that all those questions could have been easily answered with some Easter eggs or trivia bits here and there, but the writers have put no effort in this department, which makes for a lackluster ordeal. It's revealed later in the story that Lanza was working with Miguel Rodriguez, Rico's father, on Project Iapa, but Miguel quit due to ethical complications. And it's also disclosed that Iapa was initially the brainchild of Leon Espinosa, Oscar's father, and was supposed to be used for helping people. But after Leon's mysterious death and Oscar taking over the reins, he has Rico's parents killed via Sebastiano Di Ravello and agency contacts to tie up loose ends. And this was a surprisingly good way of telling us how this mission is personal to Rico, which in turn makes him even more dangerous and focused. It also sheds light on some much needed answers about Rico's past, and also gives us a good idea as to why he became the man he is today. And after they take down zone after zone, Oscar retreats to his last stronghold, the Project Iapa military base, located in the Caxias. But Rico and team storm the place, kill most Blackhanders, and take control of Iapa. But they find out that Oscar isn't there. He then arms the device which would cause the entire base to be destroyed. But right at the nick of time, Gabriela chooses to switch sides in order to defend her fellow soldiers and give the Army of Chaos the codes to bypass security and take over the whole base. They then track Espinosa to a nearby private jet and fly the weather controlling drone straight into it, killing him instantly. But it's revealed later on that the agency has already gotten its hands on the Iapa technology. And in the ending scene, Rico, Mira and Tom decide to take the agency down, which presumably will lead us into Just Cause 5. The story really isn't something brilliant or extraordinary, but for what it's worth, the overall experience is one that is truly mind-blowing. And you won't find any tonal inconsistencies throughout the entire journey, which was great. Despite many plot holes, there are moments in the game that really leave a mark, like the time when Rico finally starts trusting Tom and they have a beer together, or Lanza escaping his jail cell after decades of imprisonment and reuniting with his niece Mira. There's also some subtle yet impactful light-hearted moments between the characters. These little details were missing in Just Cause 3. Now, could the story have been better? Of course it could have. I mean, who doesn't like a tightly knit script with no loopholes? But that doesn't make the experience itself any less enjoyable. And now we arrive at the butter, the other end of the rope that holds together the entire composition of the series, the missions. Because these really are the best part of the whole damn franchise. Just Cause might not have the best told stories, the most pleasing visuals, the best gliding system. Okay, that it definitely has. or the best tunes, but the missions, they never disappoint. From the very first task, you're thrown right into the mix of things. If nothing else, the series wastes no time telling stories. It's almost like the creators are self-aware. So they go, we can't tell good stories, so let's just get into the action. From the very beginning, the basic story is established, and about half an hour into the game, they open up the entirety of this massive world to you. Let's talk about the main missions first. There are actually just 4 main ones. Operation Sandstinger, my favorite, where you have to destroy the device that creates sandstorms. Thunderbarge Objective, which deals with taking down a device which can harness thunderbolts. Operation Windwalker, which would be the tornado missions, my second favorite. And Project Yappa, which is the concluding mission. But to finish the big 4, you need to raise an army, take over territories, polish your skills, and go through several layers of action-packed missions that eventually lead you to the finale. Then there's the multiple side missions, which are mostly lateral stories about the important happenings on Solis, the Javi Huerta, Garland King, Sargento, or Army of Chaos missions, and the liberation of provinces from Black Hand control. The Javi mission deals with searching for the truth about Otorongo, a 16th century king of Solis. This mission takes you all around the map. You have to basically search for the temples or tombs and then roll some stone heads to the right place to open a door, which reveals the mystery little by little. And then there's the Garland King objectives. Remember that subtle lightheartedness I spoke of earlier? This is exactly that, because they are filled with funny moments. Garland King is basically a famous Hollywood director who's making a movie on Rico Rodriguez and his life. And in the process, you see King make Rico do all kinds of goofy stuff. From taking a car through a crane in the middle of a river to racing against time to save his non-existent sister, who Rico has no idea about, and funnily enough, she exists in the movie only to add an emotional arc, which really cracked me up. Then there are these random encounters where King's PAs will ask Rico to drive a car, and after he starts moving, they let him know that they've informed the Black Hand of his location, only to shoot a realistic chase sequence. It also represents the self-absorbed and narcissistic nature of certain showbiz people real well. For example, Garland King knows full well of the war in Solis, but she couldn't care less and is taking full advantage of the ensuing chaos. She does reflect on her life somewhat, but even that's full of narcissistic but funny lines like, I realized after coming here that the world is bigger than me. But that's not exactly what she said, but you get the gist of it. The only thing that bugged me to the max was the 436 stunts you have to perform to reach 100% completion. 436. Think that's enough? Huh? It's really fun in the beginning since it includes some cool wingsuit challenges, speeding tests, and vehicle particular stunts like taking a certain model of a car or bike through a ring. But once you get through 200, you will be saturated. Reminded me of the dreadful Riddler trophies, especially in Arkham City. The place was riddled with those! But the Sargento missions were surprisingly diverse because I expected the same task 5 or 6 times, but each mission was fresh in its own way. And it really makes you feel like a leader and a part of an army, which the main objectives shockingly don't. And now let's talk about the liberation missions, because they were the best surprise in the entire game. In Just Cause 3, each province, town, village, or military base had the same type of tasks to perform in order to liberate them, like destroying billboards or communication towers, etc, etc, etc. And despite there being multiple locations, the objectives were same throughout. But here, each location has its own distinct set of objectives that you need to carry out in order to gain control, and it's not even silly or petty things like killing a dude or something. It is substantially different almost every time. For example, if one place requires you to open up a hydroelectric dam, another place is a prison or a re-education or brainwashing center where you go and rescue prisoners and victims. So you never know what to expect from a location, which really got me excited for the whole process. No more cookie cutter BS. Little creative decisions like these often go unnoticed, but they have a huge impact on the overall experience. And this definitely had a positive one for sure. And now let's talk about the main missions, which surprisingly were the best for me. After Just Cause 3, I expected the main missions to have mindless, incoherent, fast-paced action. But I was pleasantly surprised that the missions were full of variety and progressed the story rather well. This is something that was totally missing from Just Cause 3, an emotional arc. I loved the fact that killing the antagonist was finally personal to Rico, and surprisingly, that didn't feel so in Just Cause 3 when he killed Di Ravello, although the man had killed Rico's parents. games, and that was mostly because they didn't build the story arc well enough to make you feel invested. But here, Rico finally getting to know about his past throughout the game by various people really added a nice and much needed layer. No matter which one of the 4 main missions you talk about, they all have exciting locations, seemingly impossible objectives, and a ton of mind-blowing action. I could go into extreme detail and speak for the entirety of next hour about exactly what happens in said missions, but I'd rather you play them as it's much better in person or an active gameplay. But I will give you a brief glimpse. You ready? Here it goes. You hijack trains, take over Solis's Area 51, hack massive artillery units to gain control of the skies, capture military bases with hundreds of enemies, ride a train while armed with a massive cannon through a terrifying sandstorm, breach high security manufacturing units, fly around in a blizzard to take on more armed beasts, literally fly into the eye of a tornado. God damn, if that doesn't sound exciting to you, then my friend, you need some pussy. Let's talk about the DLCs some now because they really deserve to be mentioned. The DLCs of Just Cause 3 were really good, but here they are great. You know what, cut that, they are brilliant in fact. Some people might find them a bit repetitive, but in no way, shape or form are they boring. Also, they have little or no correlation with the main story. The first and least impressive, which is a solid addition in and of itself, is the Solino Underground missions, which are basically Rico going against a few opponents in a race against time to score maximum points and drive like a savage. It really gave me major Mad Max feels. There are 4 types of challenges. To initiation challenges, where it's one-on-one for max points, the Gearhead Wars, where it's basically a demolition derby for max score, LNPs, which are races with a twist, and Los Artistas Trials, which are basically survival challenges, and your scores give you one of 4 ranks. Not scoring the minimum makes you a loser. Come on, what did you expect? Participation award. Reaching the minimum points give you B rank, and there's the A rank, and the highest, which would be, you guessed it right, the S rank? But what the fuck is that? S for Supreme, I guess. And scoring high ranks unlocks more vehicles with some serious firepower. And once you conquer all the races, you gain the respect of the Solino Underground head honchos, and they promise to stay out of the army's way. The second DLC would be the Los Demonios missions, which was extraordinary. The aforementioned Javi Huerta asks Rico for some help regarding a completely different matter. They then travel to a nearby island with some stunning and sometimes creepy architecture and find out that one of Javi's old colleagues is also there, who manipulates Rico into opening a vault, which then unleashes some kind of highly mutated alien-like creatures. Once they make their way off the island, they return to Solis and find out that infestation pockets have popped up all over the place. So Rico destroys all pockets, and once you do that, you go back to the Los Demonios island and finish what you unknowingly started. The DLC adds a certain out-of-the-world feel to the game. I've always wondered things like whether Rico is a mutant, because an ordinary human probably couldn't survive all that he has. And then when I see this, it gives me hope that Just Cause 5 will be crazier than ever, if nothing else. Also, the extermination of the infected areas itself is a treat, especially because those demon creatures give you almost no breathing space. You just can't slack around and get the job done, so it's adrenaline pumping action throughout. And last but not the least, the DLC Danger Rising, which tells the story of the agency wanting to bring Rico and Tom Sheldon down, as they're acting against them by interfering with the agency's efforts to perfect and gain control of Project IAPA. And in order to sanction the two, they send Emerson Miller, Tom Sheldon's replacement basically, to take care of business, and they don't send him alone. Not much, just 6 massive submarines and a few hundred agents. The objectives at these locations is to render the submarines obsolete and then take out their entire infrastructure. This is also where you get to access the hoverboard. And as Rico takes out the marine bases one by one, Tom pursues Miller from another direction, and then Rico finally takes him down, only to reveal that the whole ploy was just a misdirection and something much bigger and more dangerous is brewing at the agency. I can't help but think that the agency means the CIA. I mean, of course it is. The thing that stands out in this DLC is the locations and the playstyle. You get access to weapons never before seen in the game, and you also have some brief but impactful interactions with some of Rico's former colleagues. Character development, no matter in which form it comes in, is always welcome. And here too, there's an overwhelming number of enemies, which makes it a thrilling, fast-paced joyride. It is pretty much the same objectives across all 6 locations, but 6 doesn't seem enough to make it feel boring or repetitive. Maybe if there were 10 or 12, now. The 3 DLCs will take you about 6 to 8 hours to crack, but man are they worth every penny. Missing out on this would have been a massive mistake, one that I thankfully did not make. I've already touched on the side characters and their non-existent stories, so I guess it's time to speak in depth about Rico and Oscar. Oscar first. So the man is basically an evil billionaire, but then again, I wonder which billionaire isn't. It might seem like another cliche, but the fact is making ridiculous amounts of money often requires people to do unethical things, which as normal folk or mortals would probably never go through. See, there may be an anomaly here and there, but they are far and few between. The man supposedly owns not only the majority of Solis, but also the trade, manufacturing, communication networks, and other industries, in addition to having the largest private military force in the world, Black Hand, under his control. The very few interactions we do have with Oscar tells us clearly that there's no line the man wouldn't cross in order to gain total dominion over the world. There are some cliches of course, but thankfully it's not cringy or embarrassing like it was with Sebastiano Di Ravello. And now we talk about Rico. Arguably could be one of the most misunderstood or maybe miswritten characters in all of gaming. I know I'm reaching, but the man exudes charisma. There is a certain calm to his demeanor which is scary, considering he's a dictator removal specialist. The mass murder and destruction are all a part of his 9 to 5, and yet you can see that he cares deeply about his fellow soldiers. Most of the times, Rico would stop his friends Mira and Sargento from going into danger zones and offers to clear out the heat first so that they are safe. Now, I've seen critics call Rico bland and dull, which I really didn't understand. I mean, what did they want Rico to do? Dance like a fucking engine? He's seen his parents killed by a madman, has been thrown to the wolves, been betrayed, lied to, and used by the agency, and yet he remains a relatively kind-hearted man. I've always complained how killing innocents doesn't entail any consequences, but I think I've made my peace with that, and I just look at that as inevitable collateral damage. The Garland King missions and his interactions with Tom Sheldon really helped Rico build more of a presence and character, as those scenarios shed some much-needed light on who Rico is as a person. The way he shows inconsolable rage when he gets to know that his father was just to lose, and for Oscar, or like when Garland King tells him how he is the man and invites him to Hollywood. But Rico seems to not give a shit about money or fame and is almost unaware of how big of a deal he is in the Just Cause world. It portrays a humane and emotionally damaged, almost vulnerable side of Rico, which is totally missing previously. He does sound a bit cocky and arrogant when he performs stunts. Hey, wouldn't you be if you're jumping off of airplanes and literally taking on armies single-handedly? Little things like him humming Flight of the Valkyries tune and smirking when he causes massive property damage are really the fundamental building blocks of a great protagonist. It shows us how he is a machine that causes chaos, which he clearly enjoys, and he doesn't mind showing it out. I'm not gonna sit here and say he's perfect, but he's way better than what he got credit for. And to be honest, I'm defending the game, if that wasn't clear by now, because how can I not stand up for what I truly enjoyed? However, I'd like to address the fact that there was a lot of room to build up side characters. For instance, what happened to Gabriella, Oscar's right-hand woman, after the events of Just Cause 4 transpired? Or Lanza's struggle with seeing his own daughter go over to the dark side? All these answers were necessary, but we never got them, so that's a disappointment for sure. Just Cause 4 low-key has one of the better music albums. I initially didn't pay attention to the music of JC3 or even 4, but I remember distinctly how the third time I started the game, I was shocked as to how melodious the loading screen tune was. The sound of a guitar playing while there's a massive storm brewing in the background, just perfect. And that's when I started noticing the music, which I can now conclude was one of the strong suits of the game. It's not obnoxiously loud or irritating as some other games. The entire album has calm before the storm feel to it, and Zach Abramson, the music composer, deserves massive props for this. Like, even when you're just gliding around Solis, the scenery, the gameplay, and the music are just enough to make you enjoy the journey and not resort to fast traveling all the time. This is rare, and it's sad to see that since very few people actually bought the game, many praiseworthy things went unnoticed. There are some rock or metal songs that play when you're going through the Solino Underground missions, but they too gel perfectly with the scenario, and when it comes to music, nothing feels out of place. Before playing the game, I actually read a lot about it, and I saw how people were oozing hate towards it, calling it the worst, uninspired, and bland overall. But to my surprise, that did not feel like the case to me personally. Once again, I'd like to say that the outlook on anything is totally subjective, so maybe Just Cause 4 wasn't your cup of tea, but that doesn't mean that the tea itself was was bad. You know what I mean? I understand it gets frustrating when you pay $60 for a broken game, which I think the developers totally deserve flack for. But what about the abundant positives it has? That's my only question. And after all this, if anybody asks what positives, just watch the fucking video, because I've pointed out all of them pretty clearly, as I have the negatives, or at least have tried my best to do so. Then again, proof's in the pudding, as a majority of people on Google user reviews have given it a 5-star rating, almost 50% or maybe more. So clearly, there's a crowd with whom my words would resonate. It's gonna take about 40 or 50 hours for completionists, but the main story is only about 8 to 12 hours, which makes me feel that the initial price point was unjust. The game has sold 500,000 copies, or maybe just a touch more from what I could determine, and that's unjustified from a 2022 perspective. Even by today's ridiculously high standards, the game holds up very well. I know it's only 4 years old, but in those 4 years, much has changed. And yet, as I said, it holds its own. I see Just Cause Avalanche Studios' answer to Far Cry. We'll be making a video comparing Just Cause and Far Cry sometime in the future, so look out for that. And on the off chance anybody from the developers team is watching my video, which is highly unlikely, I tip my hat to you. It isn't perfect, but it's awesome nevertheless. And if you're someone who's played Just Cause 4, tell me what your thoughts are. I'd love to know. And to any fellow Just Cause fans listening, there's some great news, as Square Enix has clarified that they are going ahead with the development of Just Cause 5, and it's gonna drop anytime around 2023 or 24 maybe. I don't mind them taking their own sweet time, and I feel they have a solid basement ready, as the next part would be Rico versus the Agency, which sounds fascinating. What I do hope is that they learn from their mistakes and make a product that's polished, if not perfect, because nothing ever is, apart from Zeus apparently. So that's the entire in-depth review of the game. Whatever your thoughts are, make sure you tell me in the comment section below so we can have a discussion. So that's it for today, folks. Stay safe, stay strong, and stay tuned. It's your boy VZX signing out.